So let me go through really quickly as far as how to use the DSM-5. So I've got my small one over here. Oops, it looks backwards, but it's correct. Um, Typically at work, I actually have the big regular one. But for at home, when I'm grading papers or um, just if I'm doing something fast, I have the smaller one with me. You should really invest in both of them. Um, that would be really good. I know they cost a lot of money, but realistically, this is your Bible. Um, you really have to know all these different diagnoses really, really, really well. We get lots of folks coming to us with all sorts of different problems, and you got to know where to look within this book for it. So the first area where I go to is just kind of the first section where it goes over all the different pages for everything. And so at first it just goes into the different content area, and it doesn't really kind of break it down, but it gives me a good idea of kind of where in the book everything is at. But typically where I really start looking is right after that. It goes into the DSM-5 classifications, and it breaks down all the different disorders. And so it's in the beginning part of the DSM. And so it goes under neurodevelopmental disorders, and then you can already look and see. So intellectual disabilities is the first one, and it starts on page 17. Goes into the different specifiers, goes into communication disorders, autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, specific learning disorders, motor disorders, other neurodevelopmental disorders, and then it goes into the next category, which is going to be schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. This is just really helpful because I typically know somewhat of what overall category the patient falls into. I know they have, let's say, some signs of depression. And so then I'm going to go into depressive disorders, which starts on page 93 on this one. And I'm going to look to see which diagnosis fits it best. So then I'll look into disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, major depressive disorder, and there's lots of different specifiers for that. Persistent depressive disorder, which used to be called dysthymia, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, substance medication-induced depressive disorder due to another medical condition, other specified depressive disorder, and or an unspecified depressive disorder. Now, if it doesn't fit into any of these categories, let's say I have bereavement, or let's say it fits more into kind of the adjustment disorder category, I'm going to look further in the DSM and see where else I can find that. So next up then would be the anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive related disorders, trauma and stress related disorders, dissociative disorders, somatic symptoms and related disorders. Okay, so maybe my depression is much more somatic symptom based, and so then I would look within this area. Next up is feeding and eating disorders, then the elimination disorders, the sleep-wake disorders, sexual dysfunctions, gender dysphoria, disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders, my substance-related disorders, all my addictions. So maybe the depression is due to, let's say, cocaine use. That could be. Next up is my neurocognitive disorders. After that, I have my personality disorders. I have my paraphilic disorders. I have other mental disorders, and then next up I have medication-induced movement disorders and other adverse effects of medication. Next up, I have my V codes. So my V codes are the other conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention. And so if you look at all these different codes, they all start with a V before it. That's going to change into a Z in October once we start using the ICD-10. And in October, all of us will be using the ICD-10 codes to bill. Now, the diagnosis will remain the same. So let's look at the first V code. So the first V code is V61.20. It's parent-child relational problems. So this is if parents and kids are not getting along and there's relationship issues that we're working on. We are then going to bill starting in October under Z62.820. So it's still going to be a parent-child relationship problem. So we still need to use the DSM-5. But billing-wise, we're going to bill under the ICD-10 codes, which is in parentheses after each diagnosis. The same thing is true for any of the other codes as well. After that, if I can't find something within those boundaries, let's say bereavement, I'm still looking for bereavement, I haven't found it. I look at the index and I'm going to look under the word bereavement and it's going to pop up. And so then it gives me the pages for it, but it also lets me know that there's two categories of bereavement. It tells me that there's regular bereavement and that there's persistent complex bereavement. And it gives me the page number for persistent complex bereavement, which is really if bereavement has really extended for a long time and they're still having a lot of signs and symptoms and it's really not dissipating like it normally would. Normally, time does heal wounds. It doesn't necessarily go away. There's definitely different trigger points, but for the most part, that person is able to return back to normal functioning. So typically, once again, I go into the front of my book. I look at the overall symptom presentation and I figure out what category it falls into. And then I really look at the specific diagnostic criteria for each disorder to see which one fits my patient the best. If I can't find it there, I'm going to look under keywords here in the back under the index. You always want to have this book handy because you really want to make sure that the patient meets criteria and you want to make sure that you've asked sufficient questions to really rule out any other differential diagnosis. It's okay to have a differential diagnosis at first. You just need to make sure that you're really following up and that you're really ruling something out. So when somebody first comes off of, let's say, an addiction, let's say my cocaine addict is also showing signs of major depressive disorder. However, he's just right now coming off of the cocaine. I'm probably going to do a rule out, and I'm probably going to say that it's chemically based as of right now. So, diagnostically, you want to ask a lot of questions, and you want to figure out what comes first, the chicken or the egg. And oftentimes, it's hard for us to figure that out. We don't have a blood test that's going to tell us specifically. So a lot of it's going to be asking really good questions and following up with that.